people are immediately going to the technical side. How do we implement AI? How do we market that we're using AI and that we're a future forward organization? But what people are forgetting, all of that is our tools. None of that is successfully applicable unless you focus on the human first.
Right.
Are you preparing your teams with the right mindsets? Are you preparing them to be adaptable and open to change? Because I can tell you right now, when ChatGPT and Cloud AI are being disrupted by the next segment, your teams may have been quote unquote upskilled on these platforms, but they're not prepared for change when the next tier of change happens in 1 year, 2 years. So yes, focus on these tools, but are you really preparing your teams for not just the immediate future, but the long-term future of adaptability and flexibility?
Welcome to Limitless Minds, the podcast where curiosity meets greatness. If you're ready to discover what it takes to be truly limitless and push beyond your own limits, you're in the right place.
Welcome back to the Limitless Minds podcast. Today we have Aish Hinton, who is the Director of Learning and Transformation at WDHB, where she leads client strategy and execution across North America. She's also an executive facilitator who works with senior leaders across industries like healthcare, retail, and global enterprise, helping them navigate transformation, leadership development, and complex decision-making. In addition, Aish hosts the podcast You Live and You Learn, which I recently got a chance to be on. And there she explores lessons and stories from leaders and visionaries around the world. She's known for her ability to bring clarity, structure, and momentum to challenging environments, balancing big picture thinking with disciplined execution. Originally trained in accounting and leadership studies at the University of Denver, Aish now lives in Honolulu, where outside of work, she's often surfing, running, or taking on a new creative challenge. She's amazing. She's become a really good friend of mine, and I'm excited about sharing her with the rest of our audience. Let's go. All right. Welcome back to the Limitless Minds podcast. I have a really great friend of mine who we kind of became fast friends over the last, handful of months. We're through some mutual introductions. I just think Aish Hinton is amazing. She's kind of like rocket fuel. She's, we have some similar background. We kind of are leaders at similar types of companies. I really respect what WDHB does, and we'll learn a little about that. But, also some podcasters. I got a chance to join her podcast, a little while ago, and just had a blast. So we thought we'd swap roles. So excited to introduce our audience to Aish Hinton. Aish, what's up? How are you?
Good. How are you? Thank you so much for having me on here.
Yeah, I'm good. So I discovered, I think based on just calendaring, that you're in Hawaii. Are you in Hawaii right now? Are you home?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm home right now. I'm in Hawaii. This has been home for 3.5 years, but
Yeah.
we're heading out east. We're moving to DC this summer. So
Did you
living
tell
that
me that?
nomadic life.
Is
I
that new?
must have,
Is that news to me?
but
Okay. Dang, I missed that, I think,
you're
or I just
good.
don't remember, I suppose. But that's great. So, and you've lived in a lot of spots, and I think what's the thing that's neat that I learned about you too is you've kind of had this like multi-geographical or multicultural background. Tell us a little about that. You've lived in a lot of places, including so Anna Bellamy, for those that don't know, is our producer behind the scenes, and she's in Scotland right now, by the way, Aish. So maybe offline you have to give her some tips on that place.
Yeah.
But I'd love to learn more about some of that kind of that global upbringing and into the States, and like how that's kind of shaped and kind of morphed some of your thoughts on and perspective on like leadership and growth and people and all that stuff. So tell us a little bit about that.
Definitely. When I was a child and you grow up moving in so many different places, you don't realize what a privilege it was to see so much of the world at such a young age. You really are looking through the world through rose-colored glasses.
Mhm.
So when you had asked me to be on this podcast, I was starting to think about, what is the question that sits with me is what's my story? Why does it matter? And I
Yeah.
think this piece that you're asking about is my story. I never had a home base. I was born in the US, but my earliest memories are in Dubai. I then did move to Scotland. That was home for about 3 years before we moved
Okay.
to England for 5 years, and then back to the US at 10, a bit of time in Belgium, back to the US. All of this was following my dad's career. And then now I'm married to someone in the military. So the
Yeah.
nomadic life just continues: North Carolina, Arizona, Hawaii, DC. So this perspective about being immersed in different cultures from the UK and the Middle East to Polynesian culture now is a theme that is completely reoccurring and will continue to be a reoccurring theme in my life.
Yeah. So like, let me ask you this question. Do you like moving
Mhm.
around?
Yeah, I love being the new kid. I
Okay.
think it's
Yeah.
so fun. I
Yeah.
think that is not an easy thing though. I realize it is a maybe a bit of a blessing to be okay to say hi and introduce yourself. Does it
Mhm.
get tiring at times? Of course, but I
Yeah.
don't mind being the new kid. I think it's just such an incredible opportunity, and it's also a beautiful opportunity and a humbling opportunity just to realize how small you are in
Yeah.
this world, the more you get exposed to what's out there. But we can definitely talk about how all of that experience ties into what I do now.
Well, I mean,
So
I think if I don't know, those like talk show bits that they do where they're on the street and they're interviewing people and they ask them a question or several questions. And if you ask people like, hey, if you had whatever X amount of money or resources or access, like what would you do with it? I don't know. I've never done a study on this, but I would bet that a lot of people would say travel, right?
mhm.
Now, travel and moving are kind of different things, but I think you get a lot of the same kind of output from them and like just different, perspectives and cultures and language I mean, heck, from Hawaii to DC is like, it's a completely
Mhm.
different place, right?
Yeah.
From North to whoever, so I mean, so I'm a little envious because, I'm in the zone of life right now where we ain't going anywhere. You know what I mean? We got 3 daughters that are kind of in the thick of it. My wife is from Louisville, Kentucky, where we are. So it's like, but I do, and and if she listens to this, this is not won't be a surprise to her. Is that like you feel so like landlocked country, but I mean, what I really mean by that is like, is this it? It's like, is this
Mhm.
forever? Or is there
Yeah.
something else out there? And so I love that. Maybe I'll just live vicariously through you. So,
Well, you know what? I think it is a bit of a generational thing as well. I can say I'm a young millennial, and I think it's true that you turn to experiences as our sources of lesson. Especially, I think about during COVID, and it turned that parents were encouraging their kids to take that gap to see the world before just jumping into a career after being so quote unquote landlocked because
yeah,
of the pandemic. And so you're seeing that trend turn where it is a bit more accepting to take a year off, to not pursue the traditional path, because older generations have been taught that stability is the goal. That's what you want. You want to be comfortable, you want to be stable and create a life that is propelling the next generation. But that has completely flipped. And now reflecting on that, I see that my childhood really framed me in that way, because I have learned, and I think this translates quite a bit to the work I do now. Every culture has its own version of what right looks like. I
mm,
think it's a really good perspective to have in general when we have so many external influences with the media and perspectives and opinions, but how you greet someone, how you earn respect, what leadership even means. If you want to be open to people, and that's a characteristics you want to have, to opportunities, to experiences, you have to be willing to try something new, doing something new, and be okay with forgetting maybe a former way of working, a former mindset as well.
yeah. No, I love it. I totally agree with that. And then, also you have a athletic background. You
Mhm.
played soccer at a pretty high level. Tell us about that and how that kind of also been woven into some of how you think and how you compete and how you lead. Tell us about
Yeah.
that.
It's a smooth transition because I was just alluding a little bit towards being adaptable. And when I tell you, my athletic career was not because of natural talent.
Okay.
It was not at all. The athletic side of my story is interesting, probably for your audience, because it really was a mindset conversation for me. It wasn't a physical conversation for me.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
my dad played semi-pro soccer in India. My brother had natural talents, played in England. And for me, I tried swimming, tennis, dance, golf. I mean, I remember I was at a swim meet once, and I will never forget, it was the backstroke. And you can't really look too much to your left and to your right. So I
Yeah.
came
Yeah.
out of that water thinking I crushed it. I got out of the water. My parents are very blunt, and I was like, "How'd I do? How'd it go?" They were like, "You were dead ass last. You were
Damn.
last." And that really was, I'll never forget it. I think I was like 9, 10 years old.
Uh,
And so, but I was inspired by the sport of soccer, football at the time when I was playing it. And so when we moved to the US, I picked it up. I was so gentle on the field. I just wouldn't tackle. I wasn't aggressive, that the aggression that you needed. So they threw me in goal, which ended up kind of following my father's footsteps, which I think is a foreshadowing for a lot of my
so
life.
he was a goalie.
He was a goalkeeper too.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Yep.
That's cool. That's
And
awesome.
so what was my athletic career is so interesting because I was on the top teams at various levels, but
Mhm.
as the goalkeeper, I was always number 11 of 11 when it came to fitness. I was last every time on the conditioning days. And that feeling, even though that may not be the priority in your position, it still sticks with you. So it became
Yeah.
fuel for me. So I worked hard. I was put on the boys squad and eventually got nominated to try out for the Olympic development team. But I would say it's not something, like I said, that was a natural gift to me, but it was because I was just determined.
Yeah, yeah. You were a dog. That's what they say. That's what they call it. I think that's what
Yeah.
they say now. You were a dog, and
Yeah.
I love
I try
that.
to be.
I mean, yeah, no doubt. I mean, and so like, how do you feel like that's translated in your professional career and like how you lead and kind of even really just how you
Mhm.
contribute and how you obviously you guys are doing some fantastic work that we admire with corporations and stuff like that. How does that kind of seed into some of that work and really some of the IP and different experiences that WDHB is doing?
Yeah, so I'll talk about a little bit maybe of how I got into this line of work, and then I
Yeah,
can
yeah, please do.
translate a little bit more to WDHB. So
Yeah.
I got into this work and I was foreshadowing it a little bit. My father acquired WDHB in 2010. And
Mhm.
so I grew up at that time in 2010, I was 15 years old or so. And so I would come home from high school and he was just grinding. I mean, if I always like to say that I try and be the culmination of my parents. My dad was extremely hardworking, traveling all the time, giving as much potential and opportunities to us, giving us the American dream. And my mom is extremely nurturing and
Mhm.
caring and took care of us. So I always try and say I want to be a culmination of them. And so that quote unquote dog in me from soccer, I think really translated because I learned that from my father. Straight
Yeah,
up. I
yeah,
pinpoint
yeah,
my hard work and my ethic to him. And I don't
yeah,
think I've come across anyone who has ever questioned his work ethic. In fact,
yeah.
my uncle once told me, "Oh, you're a workhorse or you're a workaholic like your dad." And I was like, "Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I
Why, thank you.
appreciate that.
I appreciate
Thank you
that.
so
Yeah, it's a
much."
compliment. Right.
Um, and so when I now go into this line of work, so I grew up with it and I studied accounting. That's my background. I have my bachelor's, my account, and my master's in
Mhm,
accounting.
mhm,
Quickly, I realized my personality in that career didn't line up. So then eventually he said, "Why don't you start with WDHB? You're going to meet phenomenal people, phenomenal organizations, and then let's go from there."
yeah,
And it's been 8, 9 years. I haven't left. I'm continuing to learn every day. So that's how I ended up steering towards the learning and development space with WDHB.
yeah,
And WDHB, it stands for warm, decent human beings. It's who we are. We try to be at our core. It's who we try and work with. People like you, people who just have good souls, good spirits. And as long as you align there, everything else will fall into place. So we
mhm,
really make sure we seek that out. And so we specialize in designing and delivering experiential learning programs for some of the top executives and brands all around the world. So I want you to imagine if you're thinking in your organization, we are going through so much change and chaos and uncertainty, and my leaders are just behaving and thinking the exact same. How do I tell them what they're doing now will only take them so far? So we
mhm,
expose them to ecosystems, people like the best, the Olympic athletes, the Paralympians, astronauts, sports psychologists, Grammy nominated singer songwriters, people you wouldn't conventionally think about going
mhm,
to learn from and to think about your organization in a new and provocative way. That's what
yeah.
WDHB does. We are the connector of the unconventional learning moments that are
Mm,
possible.
yeah, that's a nice little marketing slogan there. I like that. And obviously, that I love what you guys are doing because how we got connected was through this kind of synergy that we have with Limitless Minds. And so, I'm sure that we'll continue having conversations around that. But I think that so I have a lot of respect for what WHB has been doing for quite a long time and continues to elevate. And so I think it's neat. And one of the things that I was curious about is, as you're getting in front of do you guys feel like you're working with more people like more individuals or at these companies that are in leadership or individual contributors or a combination of both?
Mostly leadership, but we do work with both. Mhm.
I mean, like obviously we work with both as well, but of course our entry point, most of these companies are like the leadership. And honestly, the things that you just mentioned, like the change, challenge, adversity, the change piece is coming up a lot right now. I mean, there's a lot of words that, for so many reasons, our political landscape is kind of creating indecision. There's more competitors in various spaces. The whole change with like how AI impacts my role or my business, et cetera. So we're constantly having conversations around change. And so I'm curious, what do you like right now, 2026? What are you seeing from a leadership perspective that is kind of holding people back the most right now? Like what's kind of coming to the surface the most when you're having some of these discovery calls, I'm guessing, and kind of just diving through, consulting through kind of what some of those changes and challenges are.
Yeah, you bring up a good topic. So obviously the big topic is AI. I mean, I don't even think people realize that AI is already being disrupted with quantum computing and things like that. But so
Mhm,
when it comes to these types of conversations, the biggest theme I see is people are immediately going to the technical side. How do we implement AI? How do we market that we're using AI and that we're a future forward organization? But what people are forgetting is none of that. All of that is our tools. none of that is successfully applicable unless you focus on the human first.
Right.
Are you preparing your teams with the right mindsets? Are you preparing them to be adaptable and open to change? Because I can tell you right now, when ChatGPT and Cloud AI are being disrupted by the next segment, your teams may
Mm.
have been quote unquote upskilled on these platforms, but they're not prepared for change when the
Yeah.
next tier of change happens in 1 year, 2 years. So
Yeah.
the gap I would challenge your listeners is, yes, focus on these tools, but are you really preparing your teams for not
Yeah.
just the immediate future, but the long-term future of adaptability and
I
flexibility?
mean, the word prepared is what you said several times there, right? And what's funny about
Mhm,
this is a lot of times we're having conversations. In fact, we built kind of a measurement component for individuals and their teams on this term called readiness, right?
mhm.
Preparation. How are they prepared? What's the readiness factor for this leadership group or this team or this you're about to launch a new product into a really tough market. What's the mindset readiness, not the skill set readiness? Because I think you've seen this. I mean, whether it's sport, whether it's business, etc. We spend so much time, investment, energy on training the skill, which is important, right? If, I don't care if you're a soccer player, you gotta have a good foot, you gotta understand footwork, you gotta know how to scan and read where your defenders are, so you can, off of one touch, you can go one direction to the other, right? I don't know shit about soccer, by the way, but I'm just those are just that's my
The
terminology.
rules are
But
changing
the rules are,
anyways.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
what I
exactly.
know.
In sales, like, you really have to, know your customer, know your market, know your product inside and out, features, benefits, product knowledge, objection handling, all that stuff's critical. But like, I know this, having led teams like that, I can train that all day. I can teach you how to, message a product and so on and so forth. The cool thing is that we can also teach the mindset side. And I think a lot of, in the past, people kind of thought that that was something that was more like a fixed skill, something that was inherent, but I would spend, so much time interviewing people trying to figure out what their adversity tolerance is like, what's their philosophy around competitiveness, what's their mindset. And then we bring them into these companies and then we just kind of let them float and assume that and just skill them up from a features, benefits, product knowledge perspective, and forget about like the resilience component and the and
Mhm.
the energy management component and the self-awareness and the grit and the growth mindset, all the buzzwords. And so what's fun is kind of training those things and people realizing this is a muscle that if worked on will strengthen, and if not, it will atrophy. You know,
Absolutely.
but I love that concept about like just kind of really what companies are missing. That gap is, are you prepared for not the what ifs, but like the wins? Like, hey, these things, like there is going to be a competitive landscape that's going to exist. There is going to be change, and it's coming fast, right? There is going to be leadership, a shift in leadership, right? We are going to kind of pivot and go this direction. So when that happens, like, how are you, like, are you ready to stand up against that? So I think that's really similar to what we're seeing right now too. I
Yeah,
mean,
and a big piece around this, and you mentioned this word, is resilience.
mm,
And I think when it comes to resiliency, one, I think resilience is romanticized a lot. We talk about it like it's this heroic thing, bouncing back, rising from the ashes.
mhm,
But in my experience, it's so much quieter than that. Um, I have a bit of a story. I think it also kind of alludes to WDHB, but when I was going back a little bit to my childhood, and I think that's partly why I believe in what we do so much, and this
yep,
concept around what you do as well around mindset training is, my dad used to work for an organization, a telecom communication. This is when we lived in England at the time. And he was a young accountant from India building his dream to go into the Western world. And he was working, he was the controller for EMEA, for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So a lot of
mhm,
responsibility. And one day he came home and told my mom that something was very, very wrong. He could see it in the numbers. He tried to voice it to the right people, but he was dismissed. So I'm saying this because he has this resiliency and this line of ethics, right? That just keeps
mhm,
coming up in an experience. So the next day he walked into the office and there were BBC reporters, microphones, cameras in his face saying, "What's going on? What's going on?" And this company ended up filing for Chapter 11. It turned out to be one of the largest accounting frauds in history, driven
dang,
by the greed of a handful of people at the top.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So his boss went to jail, the bosses above went to jail, and my father, the guy who had flagged this and had been ignored, was left to clean up the books for all of Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So I
yeah,
was about 8 or 9, and for that stretch of time, I actually barely saw him. He'd leave
mhm,
before I'd wake up, and he'd come home after I was asleep, and I remember one day he came home unexpectedly early, and, he my brother and I were playing in our room, and I was like, "Oh, hi, Dad," and my brother looks up and goes, "Who are you?" The younger brother, and I'm not a
mm,
parent yet, but I can't imagine what that feeling is like. So
Wow.
there is a powerful story there that happens about resiliency. So, but the outcome of that was this quiet effort of constantly showing up, not when it all blew up, but the aftermath of it. And that story of resiliency is what sticks with him. So when we do our programs, and to talk about, come back to this, when we talk about mindset training and practicing, is what are the habitual habits you are doing to maintain the quiet moments you are doing, the quiet moments and actions you're taking that showcase I am resilient, not the big moments that happen, but it's how you show up during the small ones in the
I love
aftermath.
it. So if I paraphrase this into the, to you, it sounds like
Mhm.
resilience is the constant effort of showing up consistently. Is that accurate?
Mhm.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, I think that, oftentimes, again, these are like resilience is kind of a buzzword in our space. And so is like grit. And oftentimes
Mhm.
those two things kind of overlap. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Resilience for many seems like bounce back. Grit seems like something is more like kind of your ability to just kind of run through the next
Mhm.
obstacle and
Mhm.
wall and just kind of pivot and do their thing. Really, those two things
Yeah.
coexist. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So I like that.
Resiliency isn't about being, unaffected by adversity, but it's about staying curious through it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
and then we talk about that a lot, like this, just having like the necessity to be on a constant quest for knowledge. You know what I mean? A
Mhm.
constant, that curiosity. I love people that are curious. And you
Mhm.
quickly realize you talk. Say you're having, some sort of business relationship, personal relationship, whatever it might be. That's one of my pet peeves is like when people don't ask questions. You know,
Me
uh,
too. Me
it's
too.
okay if like sometimes you can't retain everything, especially in a first meeting or early in a relationship, and so, but like I just feel like really trying to figure out, there's nothing better than somebody who's just kind of like really like looking around your eyes and just asking great questions. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
just showing curiosity, and even if they're faking it, at least
Mhm.
going through that
Yeah.
process, and because I don't know, to be honest with you, I'm not a big small talk kind of guy. I don't know if it's a strength or a weakness. I get a little embarrassed by that. I feel like guilty about it, because you go to a party or a event, networking. I just came back from Atlanta to my networking event. I'm like, I really got to gear up. Like, I got to like
Just
really
prepare
pregame,
yourself.
like just kind of
Yeah.
prepare for like, okay, like this is something I get to do, not have to do. Like, I have to really talk myself
Mhm.
into it. And then also, if I'm at a function like with friends, like I will turn into a pumpkin at some point. Don't know when it's going to be, but at some point I'm ready to go. Right. So, but I
Right.
think that like trying to kind of like shift into like the, curiosity, whether it be in a casual environment or a formal one, is something that I think, you have to kind of put that cape on and do, seems
Totally.
important.
I think curiosity is probably one of the best qualities in a person. One, it shows up around just being intellectually humble,
Hmm.
being willing to say what got me here won't take me far, but also, I mean, we've heard it. You never want to be the smartest person in the room, and if
Right.
you are, you need to find a new room.
New
That's
room. Yeah.
something that is just constantly ingrained in me, and I seek that out in people as well. I don't want to say it, but I do judge people based on how many questions they ask, or
Yeah.
are they just
Yeah.
kind of, waiting for their turn to speak?
Yeah. Yeah.
And especially with the executives that we work with,
Yeah.
if the moment you see someone with so much experience and tenure ask questions, my respect for them just goes through the roof.
Yeah. 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 I love it. Well, it's so funny. So speaking of listening and asking questions, you have a badass podcast that I got a chance to join, and I really want to implore my listeners to make sure they're checking out your podcast. You live and you learn, and through that, of course, and we have this shared experience of like being able to talk to like some really awesome people that from across, I'm sure, various kind of backgrounds and landscapes, and I'm curious, like if you tap into some of the memory bank on some of these, is there a particular guest or a story that you heard in any of these podcasts that like that always kind of resonates with you, that or maybe that you've kind of taken something, a golden nugget, and now it's like it's kind of impacted the way you move? Anything like that exists? If so, I'm gonna go back and listen to it like this afternoon. But tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's incredible that we've created a job where we're getting paid to listen and
Yeah.
learn from people for an hour. I think that's
Mhm.
one of the best jobs out there.
Yeah.
It's a hard question because we've had people. My very, very first episode was the seventh employee of Lululemon.
Oh
And
wow.
Lululemon is going through a lot right now. But he
Yeah.
was on the founding team of Lululemon. He was actually the first person to provide zippers to Lululemon products.
Oh.
Um,
Nice.
and so he's a Canadian guy named Daryl Kopke. His perspective on entrepreneurship, risk taking, building a family culture in an organization, and building a brand that people are so bought into is just such a inspiring story. It makes me want to work harder and achieve more, and it just gives you that motivation that you sometimes may be missing or lacking. That's a great one to go to for that. I also have an episode. I have two more that I can talk about. One is with the founder of North Face. I think
Hmm.
that's just another beautiful story on entrepreneurship. But the other one I want to talk about is the chief scientist at Blue Origin,
Okay.
Dr. Tara Rutley. She was the
Hmm.
former associate chief scientist at NASA, and we had this whole conversation around adaptability because she went from a very traditional organization where she was quote unquote the youngest person at the organization, where it was all about transparency. And of course, by the time this comes out, Artemis has launched. So there's a lot of excitement around it.
Yeah.
But then she talks about having to transition to Blue Origin, a very Amazon culture where she is maybe one of the older people at the
Hmm.
organization.
Yeah.
And it's more about it's a private organization. So how are you transitioning into adapting into a new culture, a new way of working, a new fit? So I find that episode really ties closely to what we're talking about here today, from probably one of the most extraordinary and the most humble people I've ever met. She just finished her PhD in archaeology or something. Like
Yeah.
she's talk about someone who has a curious mind.
That's cool. Yeah, I'll have to check. I'm gonna check both. I'm gonna check all those out when I get a chance. I mean, I think, yeah, I think it's always fun to kind of, because not everybody listen. I would love to for everybody to listen to our podcast. Not everybody does, and they're missing out. They're missing out on a lot of stuff. And so, like, I'm always curious, like, who you talk to that's kind of drop nuggets and like, kind of, change the way you think about something and so on and so forth. But one of the
I
things you
mean,
mentioned, yeah,
I'll mention one more actually, just because it may be relevant for your audience. We have a
mhm,
lot of Olympic athletes on our
yeah,
podcast as well, and
yeah,
Paralympians. So I'll give three names really quickly. Naya Tapper, she was the captain of the women's rugby team that won the bronze medal at the last
hmm,
Olympic Games. I have an
hmm,
episode with her just about her life story. It's an incredible story of resiliency. Lex Gillette, another incredible story of resiliency. He's a blind long jumper competing in LA 2028 alongside my third guest, which is Jerome Avery. That episode actually just came out, but he is Lex's guide runner. So he talks a lot about servant leadership, acting as the eyes and ears for Lex. So for the sports fans out there, if you want someone
yeah.
to cheer for LA 2028, but those three episodes are also very
Yeah, it's
beautiful.
cool, and I think I shared this with you before, like, we've got a chance to do some work with Lex, and he's pretty,
Hmm.
obviously inspiring, but really just, beyond the obvious, not having sight, and he talks about, like, kind of vision without sight, right? It's kinda, I think, one of his kind
Hmm.
of, keynote, like, taglines or whatever, but
Hmm.
I remember, during COVID having him join us on a virtual, when the virtual was like new for everybody, and we were on there for an hour, and he did a, kind of a workshop keynote kind of thing. When I didn't know that he was going to break into song. Have you heard him sing?
I thought Jerome was the singer. So no.
Jerome may be a singer. I don't Jerome. If maybe
Yeah.
you can blow too, but
Hidden talents.
Lex sang. It's a Beatles song. It was like the Blackbird singing in the dead of night. That song. I forget what it's called. Is that called
Hmm.
Blackbird?
Yeah, yeah.
He sings that song, and like this is after he did his keynote, and like everybody's all inspired, and then he sings that, and people were like, like,
Yeah.
like tears and everything. I'll never forget it. It was like, and this was obviously like 5 or 6 years ago. It was like really good. So yeah, definitely root for Gillex. Is Lex still competing? Will he compete in 2028? Do you know?
He is. Yeah.
That's amazing. I have to check in
Both
on
of
him.
them.
That's cool.
Mhm.
That's really neat.
I think
Yeah.
it's their
Uh,
last games too, so
yeah. Yeah.
but there
Yeah.
are
And that's
some young ones that Jerome are working with, that are coming up, like a young 22-year-old who's like 6'3", so we'll
yeah.
get the names for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, listen, I think the other thing you mentioned with one of the guests, you mentioned this word risk.
Mm.
Um, and I think you and I have talked about risk a little bit in some previous conversations, but and I may have shared with you with my three daughters, it's kind of like people talk about legacy and like what do you want for your kids and so on and so forth. And I've shared often that I'm really like bullish on trying to create an environment where my girls, 13, 10, and 8, 13, 10, and 8, Gracie, Nora, Maddie, where they have a very high and purposeful like risk tolerance,
Mhm.
because I think that they're going to have, and honestly maybe be forced to make decisions that feel really risky, but hopefully they're convicted on, but the world might tell them to maybe play it safe, right?
Mhm.
Now, you've been somebody who if nothing else, because of the, this kind of this nomad life that you've had, right? You've moved so many different places. The ability to kind of say, like, kind of just have a yes mentality and be like, yeah, that's what we're doing, right? And some of that you do because of your partner in your marriage, and like, this is, hey, this is what we signed up for. Like, we're doing this together, right?
Mhm.
But it takes a little bit of a of a calloused kind of component of like risk tolerance to be able to do that and do it willingly, and I'll lean into it. Tell me a little bit about how you see, like, your philosophy around risk,
Mhm.
and both from like a leadership perspective, but even outside of leadership, just in life. Like, how where's your tolerance at? Like, how do you think about risk, and like, when do you leap, and when do you, maybe sit back?
I'd be remiss to say that the neutral thinking hasn't, it's absolutely resonated with me as of late, as I've read all the books
Yeah.
and dive deeper into the concept and gotten to know you and Limitless Minds more. Growing up, I would say I was very much a risk taker. I was the first one to go down the crazy slides. I tackled with the boys. That was just who I was, but that doesn't come easy though. So growing up and working in the profession I do, and honestly being in rooms where I very often don't feel like I belong, but somehow I find myself there, all happened because I took a particular risk. The thing with risks is you never know what that outcome is, but you
Mhm.
see it far enough in the future that you wouldn't be taking the risk unless there was a really great potential or opportunity at the end of it. So
Mhm.
when I look at risks, first off, nothing is that serious. I
Yeah.
am not working in space. I'm not a doctor. My job is not life or death.
Mhm.
So, what is truly the worst that can happen? I joke around about it. Whenever I hear someone say mission critical at work, I kind of laugh. I'm like, is it really mission critical? Or are we just, adding more
Using
stress to something that
Yeah.
doesn't mandate that? So,
Mhm.
um, when I look at risk, I think of it as a one door or two door risk. So if I'm making a difficult choice, or if your daughters are making a difficult choice, is there an opportunity to go back and go back to point zero, or do they have to move forward? And that kind of helps measure how risky you can be, because then it
Mhm.
makes you start thinking about not just the worst case scenario or the best case scenario, but it just makes you think back of, I can go back to where I started. So if it's a career move, people are saying, always wondering, should I go to a different career? But I'm happy where I'm at, but this opportunity is really good. What should I do? Well, have you built strong enough relationships at your current company that you can be honest with the position you're at? And who knows, maybe they even may support it. Maybe you do go learn something new and you bring that knowledge back because you've maintained that relationship. That's a two-door decision
Yeah.
versus being sly about it, not being straight up, taking the risk, moving forward, but burning that bridge. Then you've created a one door opportunity. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
how are you ensuring that those big decisions, or what may feel like big decisions you're making, are two-door decisions versus
Yeah,
one-door
I love that
decisions?
two-door decision like concept. I mean, when we started Limitless Minds in 2018, 2019, I was working at a really awesome high growth pharma company, and had felt like, I put a bunch of years into it. And at that point, it had been the longest time I'd worked at one place, and you put a lot of sweat equity and whatnot into something, and part of the big piece of it is like, you have a great, you build a really good reputation, you have these awesome relationships. You're like, man, am I going to have to start all over in a space that with really literally building a company from the ground up? And I kind of thought to myself, like, if we suck at this new venture, I would hope that between relationships and my knowledge and experience, I can always come back. Whether it be that company or another one. Like, what's the worst that can happen, right? Now, and the regret that I'd have if I didn't take that leap now, would be like really, that would be really heavy, right? The
Hmm.
cost of that regret would be pricey, and so I think I think that's another question that I would ask myself too. If somebody's like talking about, is like faced with some sort of like risky, like business, like opportunity or whatever, is like, close your eyes and kind of imagine what kind of regret you may have, a few years from now, a couple months from now, whatever it is, like, if you didn't do it, So I mean, I think you're right though. I think also this, that it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the generational component. You said you're a younger millennial.
Hmm.
I'm like the first millennial. I'm like the old millennial, I think. I mean, I'm 1983, so I think I'm in, depending on what data you're looking, I think I'm still in that window. I think it's 81 maybe
Hmm.
is like the first millennial. Yeah.
You're a
So
millennial.
I'm a millennial. Yeah, I'm in there. But like, I say that like I'm an older millennial, so I kind of straddle the lines of kind of the OGs, previous to us. and then also being a millennial by nature, and growing up with social media, or being in college when like Facebook came out in like 2005 or whatever that
8,
was.
5, yeah.
Was it 8? I think, what
I
year was it?
remember I remember I started my Facebook in 2008, so maybe that's why that number
I
came
I
to
think
mind.
I feel like I remember my Facebook profile being when I was still in college, like my senior year, I believe. So I'm wanting to say
Mhm.
2005. Somebody can fact check us on it. But either way, early
I did I
2000s.
did I did delete my Facebook this year, so
I haven't been on Facebook in a year and a half. And honestly, I guess maybe it's a meta thing. I haven't been on Instagram, but people see posts from me. Like I've hired somebody to kind of not to just post for me, but like to just like be in the platform for me. Like
Mhm.
I'll create the stuff on the outside of it. It just bogs me down
Overwhelmed.
when I'm scrolling in there, and the algorithm gets me, and like I'll see stuff on my family who's kind of some public figures, and it's just like it wears me out, man. So but I'm sure I'm missing some, like I was just telling somebody the other day, I was like, I probably have people like in my DMs that I probably should be responding to, and they're wondering why I'm ignoring them, but I guess they're gonna have to live with it. If they really know me, they're gonna probably hit me up anyway, right? Like call me.
Exactly. We
So
can have a
it's
whole
just
conversation about the impact of social media, the good, the bad, the ugly, all that good stuff.
I think it might have to be maybe we can make that a part 2, you know what I mean? Because like there's a lot to talk about there, and we've talked about my kids already, but a lot of my friends and peers are talk about kind of make this informal pact that we're not going to give our kids cell phones until whenever, right, 8th grade or until they're 16 or whatever it is, and then like life starts happening. And there's a logistical component that's really kind of helpful with my 13-year-old having a cell phone because she's traveling practice and camps and all these different things. So it's like a good, nice way to communicate. But then what follows is, hey, I want Snap. Hey,
Mm,
hey, I want this. And you're like, man. So we've had to, write some contracts for her to sign to have access to some of these things. And we haven't given her access to a number of items, and she hates us for it.
mm.
But hopefully she thinks this down the road. But that's definitely worth a whole nother 30-minute, 45-minute
Totally.
conversation for sure.
Totally.
So question for you. So like, what is next for you? I mean, so you got you live in you learn podcast. WDHB's
Mhm,
rocking and rolling. I think you're
mhm,
moving here shortly to the East
mhm,
Coast. What else
mhm.
is next up there? What else should we be looking for as far as like action? Where can people like find you?
Yeah.
Content and stuff. Yeah.
I think this kind of alludes to who I am as a person. And what I recently am learning a lot is you can't plan too far ahead. At least for my life, I've found
Yeah.
that way. But my next couple of months are just really, really exciting. I'm on the
Yeah.
road quite a bit. So if anyone, I'm always down to grab a cup of coffee, meet up, connect. So I'll be bouncing around New York, Florida, California, DC area for the next few months for
Hmm.
work. Uh, you will continue to find me doing season 4 of You Live and You Learn later this year. We just wrapped up season 3, which is really fun. Please check out Harry's episode as well. Um, and then I'm just having the opportunity to continue work with some incredibly powerful folks. And I like I talked about earlier, I tend to find myself to be the youngest person, maybe the least experienced person in the room, but I'm still finding myself in these rooms. And so really, blessed to be working quite a bit in the beauty industry, in the oil and gas industry, and energy industry, automotive as well. So I'm really active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. You can type in my name, Ash Hinton, and I'm active on social media. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, all that good stuff, just to
Yeah.
see a bit more of the human side of
Yeah.
me. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's funny before we do close, because um, because you said something a little earlier and you mentioned it again, and I wanted to make sure I didn't gloss over this. So you mentioned like there's times where you feel like there's rooms that you don't necessarily
Mm,
deserve to be in or are surprised you're in, and you make it work and figure it out. I think some people might call that some version of imposter syndrome.
100%.
Right. Um, tell me about that, and like how do you work through that mentally? Because whether you're,
Mm,
a female in leadership, whether you're a person of color in leadership, or whether you're just somebody who's like, a high flyer and just finding themselves continue to elevate. I don't care who you are demographically. Like, if you feel like, man, do I even have the like my resume should not have me in this room, or this person is way smarter than I am. Everything they say, I don't understand what they're talking about. I'm trying to raise money. I'm trying to raise capital. I've never done this before. Whatever it is, right? How do you like, how could you, what kind of framework should you have mentally to kind of be able to withstand or endure that type of feeling and kind of get through it?
yeah, I was just at Indian Wells, and Lily Collins was in the same room as I was.
Yeah.
Wonderful, kind person, and I was with my friend, and we were chatting about it, and she's like, "We should go say hi," and I was like, "Oh, it's all right. I don't think we should." And she goes, "Ash, closed mouths don't get fed." I was like, "All right, say
Yeah.
less, let's go." So that one stuck with me, but I will say, a few things I rely on is a curiosity, and we've talked about this, will always
Mhm.
showcase you as a humble person, and that is always gonna be well respected. So in a world that really rewards decisiveness, curiosity sometimes can feel like a weakness, but I think it could
Mhm.
actually be your greatest competitive advantage. Um,
Yeah.
when it comes to being in those spaces that you do feel comfortable, it's okay to navigate and pivot and adapt to those moments without losing yourself. So no matter what room you're in, I always make sure that I just stay true to who I am, whether that's a room or a country or a state. One thing I would say, if I could say, is just like a mantra I live by is earn the trust before you earn the right to challenge. So
Mm.
that is through questioning, that is through curiosity, and humility isn't a lack of confidence. So it's the recognition that trust is what turns influence into impact. So build it first through trust, bring up that challenge, and then you're fostering powerful relationships that will eventually carry you forward and put you in higher rooms and other rooms. So
Yeah, I
that's
love it.
something.
I love it. I love it. I mean, and the reason why I wanted to like make sure I didn't gloss over that is because like, I know we have a lot of people that listen to this podcast and will listen to this episode that have some version of imposter syndrome or have been in scenarios in the past or kind of about to take a leap into something. We talk about risk, we talk about imposter syndrome. Sometimes those two things collide, right? If you take a risk, you're finding yourself in places you don't know. You have this kind of like unconscious incompetence where you don't even know that you don't know yet, right? Or you might be in a space where you do have a sense for where you're headed, but you're just not that dude yet. You're not that gal yet. Like you got to like put some time in. We call that conscious incompetence, like knowing that like there's some growth ahead of you, but like having that knowledge kind of puts you in a position to kind of figure out, well, how do I solve for it and how do I kind of skill up and actualize potential and all that stuff. So I'm just curious, but I've certainly had that as a founder, first time founder. Um, when you're building something from the ground up, and luckily we've had some really cool success, but along the way, and I'm not even talking about like years ago, I'm talking about along the way recently, and often, there's times where you question like, what the hell am I doing? Why did we do this? Or like, I've sat in my car before going to my house with like tears in my eyes, like, and trying to leave it in the car and then go in, right? And
And I'll
so
tell
I've
you,
been,
Harry, if you have never felt that feeling, you have not taken enough risks in your life.
yeah,
If you're not questioning that
yeah,
almost weekly, daily,
yeah.
I would challenge you to take more risks.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with it. And so good news, I must be taking some risks because your boy has been in his
There you
feelings in
go.
the past. And no, it's all good. So listen, Ash, I really appreciate you being on, and hopefully, we can kind of like revisit more conversations, talk social media, talk business, and like I said, I love what you and the crew are doing at WHB. I love what you're doing with the podcast. You live and you learn. And so, it's just kind of that cliche, but it's real. It's like just surrounding yourself with people that are doing big things and make you better is one of the things we're trying to do with this work here on this podcast that we put together. So I guess mission accomplished here today for sure. But
Awesome.
so listen, I really appreciate you. And for our audience, remember, you don't have to be sick to get better.
Mhm.